Hi, my name's Martin Purnell, and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who go or don't go to church, and where we can meet and hear from those that have made their faith count. So today's guest, who is he? Well, he's a published author of 5 books. He is a retired social worker and teacher. Our guest is also a philosopher. His latest book, recently published and available at all good Christian bookshops and the internet, is called Viviana, a story of faith, peril and triumph. So how much research was needed for our guest to base this story in the early 4th century? Why did our guest want to deal with the process the bishops faced when authoring what is now known as the Nicene Creed? What does our guest think about slavery as mentioned in the Bible and the slavery William Wilberforce wanted to abolish in the early 1800s? And how, as a philosopher and social worker, have these subjects changed his own faith? Maybe they haven't. Let's find out. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, and that is Nathan Driscoll. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today, good sir. For those that know nothing about you, where are we speaking to you from?
You're speaking to me from southeast London.
A little village, no doubt.
Yes, indeed. A place that Donald Trump thinks is a bad place to live in, but it's not.
Let's go for it. I'm looking forward to this podcast, Nathan. So much to discuss, but before we do, 5 pertinent or maybe not so pertinent questions to ask you. So, fingers on the buzzers, let's go.
Yes.
Question number 1. If you could invite anybody from history for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, who would it be?
I had a good think about this question. There are 2 possibilities. One is Rowan Williams, the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, and the other one is Desmond Tutu, who is in fact not alive anymore. They both have enormous wisdom, huge intellect, but great humility. Given the fact that they know so much compared to other people, they realize, and it comes through in their attitudes and the way they speak, that we're just scratching the surface, all of us, in terms of what we understand about life, its meaning and its purpose. And nobody is in a position to act in a superior manner towards others. And they embody that completely for me. And I particularly like Rowan Williams. He's such a widely read philosopher and social commentator. I find him extraordinarily inspiring to listen to.
Well, both great answers, but I'm going to have to put you on the spot here, Nathan. You can only have one person. Who's it going to be?
It'll be Rowan Williams.
And, of course, when Rowan turns up at your house, you have to cook him a meal. So what are you going to cook him?
Well, I think I might like to ask him what he likes to eat before he comes. Because I'll have to be in touch with him to arrange a time for him to arrive.
That's very good. Well thought out answer. Because normally the answer is, well, I'll take him down to our favourite Chinese takeaway or whatever.
My wife, who's recently given up work, has been doing some cooking this week, so I'd leave it to her to choose something.
Very wise. I do actually know somebody who had the pleasure of putting Rowan Williams up for an evening.
Oh, right.
And yeah, he apparently really is humble.
Yes.
So in that case then, just give him a piece of toast. No butter. Just a piece of toast. Maybe a glass of water.
Yeah, and he would be very thankful. I've heard him speak several times. He often speaks at St. Martin in the Fields in London. So I've had a chance to listen to him recently.
Well, that's a good answer. A good start. Thank you very much, Nathan. Question number
Pleasure.
2. Who is your favourite biblical character or favourite biblical story or favourite parable, please?
I think the Good Samaritan is one that stays with me perhaps more than any other parable, partly because it crosses boundaries, because we seem to live in an age where people's identity, important as that is, that seems to be the finishing point. There's nothing deeper, there's nothing more stronger that can cross those boundaries. And you see that with kind of the conflict over asylum seekers, for example. But I like the Good Samaritan because it crosses that boundary. There's something deeper that matters more than our personal identity. And it's the same with, funnily enough, there was a sermon in church on Sunday about the 10 lepers. And one of them who came back to say thank you turned out to be a Samaritan. So it was the other side, and how we are aware of that at this moment in time with the Gaza Palestinian Israeli conflict on our screens, with so much happening around that. So the Good Samaritan, probably, and I do love the widow's mite as well.
Why?
Because I think it encapsulates the fact that what we think is important in terms of size, power, control, wealth, is not what God sees as important. And after all, we are his creation.
Mm.
So it's a reminder that our values are not necessarily the values that God holds, and that we should look again at what matters.
No doubt you're going to tell us what really does matter throughout the rest of this podcast.
Well, I'll try and say what matters to me.
Yeah.
I don't like to prescribe what matters for other people, because I think we all have to find our own personal journey, whether it's with faith or without faith. You know, I have friends on both sides of that fence. But if you approach it with a sense of arrogance, then I don't think you can discover anything except more of your own arrogance. And that's not a good place to be.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Question 3 then, bearing this in mind, arrogance and humility. If you were Prime Minister for the day, Nathan, and could change any law or impose a new law, and it can be totally frivolous, what would it be?
Well, I think for this country, which is my home, having lived here all my life, I think the notion of community is decreasing. I mean, the way our lives are set up anyway is we live in our own houses. We might connect with neighbours after a while, but we have our sort of boundaries, and we live in, as Pete Seeger used to sing, little boxes. But in deprived areas where there aren't that many opportunities and education isn't necessarily seen as a priority, I think there's a great need for community. So I would invest in some way in community, perhaps even on a street by street basis or a few streets by few streets basis, and that would mean creating a sort of center of a street, kind of hub, paying somebody it wouldn't be easy to find those people, but there would have to be people from that street who wanted to actually bring together. You know, in any community, you find people who want to accumulate as much for themselves as possible, and that is their goal in life. And then you also find other people who actually want to share more. Now, if you find those people who want to share more, and without disrespecting anybody's ambition, try and bring people together, particularly young people who seem to have very little options in deprived areas.
Yeah.
I think that would be something that would be worth trying. I don't think it would be an easy success, but it's something I would want to see.
Great answer. And as I say to quite a few people when they come up with really good ideas, yeah, good luck with that one as Prime Minister. See, try and get that one through. You can just see him saying, yeah, but where's the budget from?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the problems, is that we've got this mantra called economic growth. But underneath that umbrella is an awful lot of destructive and antisocial stuff that is going on. So we have to look again as to whether economic growth is the only measure of success.
Well, you mentioned London, where you live, southeast London.
Yes.
There's a phenomenal podcast went out about 6 months ago now with Dave Mann. And I strongly recommend everybody to listen to what's actually going on in the East End of London.
Yes.
And it's like, whoa, community. Yes, Dave, fantastic. And he's a West Ham fan as well, so you can forgive him for that.
Okay.
An amazing podcast. And there are Christians as well. Birmingham, we've got Angie and Ash Barker, what they're doing in their community. Yeah, some phenomenal things going on. So, yes, Question 4. Nathan, outside of family events, what has been your most enjoyable day out, please? And when I say outside of family events, I'm talking about outside of birthdays and Christmas.
Well, obviously, if it's just birthdays and Christmas, I'd have to say my wedding day. But the answer I'd sort of prepared, my sister is a professional harpist of some renown. Some years ago, she was on a session with an American violinist by the name of Itzhak Perlman. And he's a remarkable violinist. The warmth of his tone is world renowned in that field. Mm-hmm. He was doing 2 sessions at Abbey Road, and she managed to get me in for 2 days. And my wife came for one of the days. Oh, it was sensational. It was absolutely wonderful listening to him. I was in some sort of booth somewhere, I think, or in a corner with some headphones on. And it was a magical experience, one that I'll never forget.
Yeah. Am I jealous? Slightly.
Yeah,
it's those two words you said, road and abbey, that come to mind.
Oh, right. Yes, quite. It's just a big room.
Apparently so. Yeah, I've got a really good mate who's been heavily involved in sound engineering, so often goes down there.
Yes.
I'm one of the few that's never been able to go in there. Maybe it's just as well, because I'll go, oh, guess which album was recorded in this room? This one. Without even mentioning 4 people from Liverpool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very good. And yes, I did know about your sister. And yes, she is of some renown as well. So that is said as a matter of fact. Question 5. What has been your most embarrassing moment to date, please, Nathan?
Before I was married, I used to share a flat with my closest friend. He was a great hit with the girls. I mean, he's married now and stuff for years and years. And this girl asked him round one day, and he and I had been playing squash. And he said, "Oh, go, just come around as well." So the two of us turned up, and she'd obviously only been expecting him, as she had 2 pieces of salmon, I think, and she had to dig into her freezer for a different kind of fish for me. So I felt slightly embarrassed by that, but it was a lot of fun, my friend.
And this is where you say, she never married him, but I married her.
No, neither of us married her.
But I tell you what, as a bonus, you said that the best day of your life was your wedding day.
Yes.
Tell me more.
I was single for a long time. I was very shy as a young person. I went to a single-sex school. My parents had come over from India. My father was a classical musician. I did get involved in a church when I was a teenager, but really I was deeply sort of shy about girls and stuff. I suppose I was nearly 40 when I got married, and when I did meet my wife, we worked in the same office for 6 years, in the social work office. And when it became opportune for us to spend more time together, as it were, because both of us were sort of free, as it were, I don't know, we just fitted together. I didn't have to try. It was just a sense of togetherness, and thank God we've still got that.
Wonderful.
It's lovely. I'm not saying life's easy, but that bond, that sort of comfortableness, that affection, that deep affection, that's what matters, you know.
Wow, well, that's a lovely answer, and I hope your wife is listening the other side of the keyhole, because if she is, I think you're going to have a nice piece of salmon tonight for tea.
I don't think she is listening, actually.
Thanks for sharing all those things.
Right.
I've seen so many times now over the past few months just how off-piste we go. And obviously, I do want to talk about your book, because I think it is fascinating, because many people would have heard of the Nicene Creed and not know much about it, let alone why you've written a book and put your own novel around it as well.
Yes.
But before we do, philosophy.
Yes.
How screwed up did you get learning about philosophy with your Christian faith?
I did a sort of social administration degree at Manchester Polytechnic in order to become a social worker as part of the pathway towards it. And we had an inspiring philosophy teacher there. And suddenly it just triggered something in my mind that there were all these thinkers and writers who had the most amazing imaginations and perceptions about what could be done with words, how to understand life, nature, creation. I mean, most philosophers were not Christian believers. They were other than that, really, because they were standing out from the normal ethic of the time. But it just caught my imagination, whereas schoolwork had been a bit of a drudge. This I found interesting. And I thought, well, if people are exploring what the meaning of life is, or what the meaning of society is, I want to know what that's about. I want to join in that search. And to be honest, it didn't really interrupt my faith. I think the critical point for me in terms of faith was that I wanted to know whether God would be displeased with me if I thought for myself, if I used my own mind, or do I just have to simply follow the party line, go to church every Sunday, listen to doctrine that I don't fully understand, that I'm not sure anybody else fully understands, but it's put over as if everybody does understand it. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. And I would pray about it, perhaps, and I suppose wait for the thunderbolt to arrive, but it never arrived. So I carried on. And I think probably one area that I was very hesitant about was teaching young people about the sort of about judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to put myself in the position of telling young people, particularly, but anybody now, in terms of what I think God will do in terms of the way he judges them, because I don't even know how God will judge me. And I'm not saying there are no criteria between righteousness and depravity. Of course there are. And the recent war and the atrocities, make that very clear. But I do not want to be in that position to say to someone, look, God is going to do this to you unless you say this, this, and this. That is not me. And so I prayed about that, and I went and saw the vicar because I didn't want to carry on teaching the young people. I never started, but I didn't want to teach the young people that. And so I stepped away from that kind of work, and I carried on with my faith. And I suppose that was the critical point for me, that I was able to say, look, this is the doctrine that I'm being taught. I don't fully understand that bit. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I can't put myself in the position of wanting to judge somebody else. I don't judge anybody now because that's not my place. For example, you get verses, I forget the precise verse, where Jesus will say, unless you acknowledge me, you don't acknowledge my Father. And if you deny me, you deny my Father. And then you get other verses, like in the parable of the sheep and the goats, that say that what you did to the least of these, you did to me. So what you do may be more important than what you say. And then you get other verses that say, I've come that the blind may see, and those who see become blind, to paraphrase. I haven't got the exact verses in front of me. So with that combination of stuff, it's about sort of recognizing, yes, God does teach, that the scriptures do teach about judgment, but where do I stand in relation to other people? And I'm not willing to judge other people in the way that perhaps some traditional evangelicals do.
See, that's fantastic, because I did say earlier on, it could boil down to how do we read it?
Yes.
One of the reasons why we call this podcast Off-Grid Christianity is because I firmly believe that lots of people throughout the world who have been screwed up in church by the theology, not understanding it. Like you're saying, how many people actually understand it here and a particular sermon? They don't want to put their head by the pulpit saying, excuse me, I don't understand that. I to be shot down in flames. So they would rather leave.
Yes.
But you haven't left.
No, I haven't. No.
So tell me more why you didn't leave then.
I think there have been times when I've not sort of perhaps attended as regularly as other times, but I think that's irrelevant, to be honest. I think it's because I am convinced that Christ's ministry gives us a window into what God intended humanity to be. And that because we're also understandably wrapped up in surviving, in protecting our families, looking out for possible dangers and threats, that we become very sort of inward looking, as it were. And I think countries can do that as well, and communities can do it. But I think Christ opened a window into humanity that I don't think anybody else has opened. And the whole teaching that God became man, which was critical to the Nicene Creed, believe it or not, is, I think, unique to Christianity in that here was God saying, so many philosophies and ways of understanding God have God as a distant being who cannot be moved or shaken. But here in Christianity, we have a God who suffers. Because if a God who doesn't understand suffering doesn't know everything. So even on the criteria of omniscience, that God can only be God if God suffers. And so many people want God, say that there can't be any God because there's no perfection. We don't have a perfect world. We don't have life without suffering, without difficulty, without challenge. without natural disaster, for example. There can be no God. But for me, the God who suffers is the God who I trust.
Brilliant answer. Wow, this is going to be some podcast to make us think today. Okay, having studied philosophy, and that didn't screw you up.
No, it didn't. No.
You became a social worker.
Yes,
so I'm going to ask you about this then. Why did you want to be a social worker?
I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I was young, because my family were a family of musicians, and I knew I wouldn't be a musician. A, I wasn't good enough, and B, I wasn't really interested in music when I was young. I was more interested in football. So I think my sister said to me, yeah, you should become a probation officer or a social worker. And I think that's where I got the idea from. And I thought that's what I could do. And so I sort of studied down that pathway. But I think there's just one more thing I'd perhaps like to say about philosophy, if I could. Sometimes people think philosophy is, and it is sometimes an unintelligible world of concepts and ideas that ordinary people cannot access. You know, it's only professors with white hair and perhaps people as old as me, but who've got sort of more hair, who can sort of understand these esoteric things. But if you think about it, the whole drift of our understanding of the natural world is rightly based on the discoveries that scientists have made centering around evolution. But if you look at the other side of it, here we are, tiny specks in the universe who can alter that process. We've got the technology now to interfere with people's DNA. We can redesign. We don't know the beginnings of life, but we can redesign it. We can reconfigure it. And it's that intention against that drift of purposeless sort of process that creates the mystery of life. Here we are, we can design. We can't predict how evolution's going to go, but we can look back at it and see what happened. And now we can interfere with it medically as well. And there are huge moral issues as to how we use our knowledge. We seem to be on a roller coaster of whatever we discover we'll use for good or bad. So philosophy has got something to offer us.
I think, therefore I am. Okay,
yes.
Some people have probably made millions out of just discussing that. Me, it's just like, okay, and the next subject is ding.
I'm sorry if that was a bit too involved.
Not at all. I do like a good discussion. Also like a lot of silliness as well. And if you want to hear silly stuff about philosophy, then may I suggest you dig out on YouTube John Cleese and his Rhubarb Tart song, which is all about philosophy. More importantly, philosophers. Very funny it is too. But from philosophy to social workers.
Yes.
Social workers have never, ever in my lifetime had a good, positive tick from most people.
No.
We always hear the bad side of it.
Yes, you do.
Which, when you think what they're trying to achieve on a minimum budget, we shouldn't really be knocking it. But unfortunately, in the lifestyle that we have, it's only the bad stories that come through.
Yes, I'm afraid it is. Yes.
So how did that affect your Christian faith then?
Well, I liked to think that I was working with other social workers as well in teams. I think we generally all felt that we wanted to make a difference, that we wanted to help people where we could. You can't wave a magic wand and make people's lives into some sort of fairyland. But what you can do is if you are referred with a particular problem that within your remit to solve, then you can do it efficiently or you can do it incompetently. And if you do it efficiently, then you've done your job. Yeah. You've done as much as you can, and you may have made a difference.
As a Christian then, bearing in mind, we're talking, I suppose, from the 70s and 80s onwards,
yes,
where more and more people are realising, hey, our rights have been affected here, and you can't say things like that to a person anymore, and we're going to get a social service into you. How much did this affect your Christian faith, and how difficult was it for you to actually be a Christian as a social worker?
It's not that difficult being a Christian in social work. I've always had a fairly tolerant perspective of other people who are different to me. I'm open about sexuality and gender, put it like that. I mean, I was reading Desmond Tutu last night, just sort of in preparation for talking to you, Martin, and I came across, he said, look, I'm black. I cannot do anything about that. And there's no reason why people should oppress me because I'm black. And he used that in his work. And he said, look, if you find that your sexuality is not the same as most people and you can't do anything about it, it's the same thing as far as he's concerned. So I've never been, oh, I'm a Christian, I don't like homosexuals, lesbians, etc. I've not done that because I don't feel that. And I don't feel I'm disrespecting, I don't think I'm necessarily going against scripture, but I mean, that's another story that would take us ages to investigate.
Oh, yes.
But the thing is, with social work, there are lots of Christians in social work, but there are also lots of Muslims. There are also lots of Hindus. There are lots of Sikhs. These are people who want to make a difference. So you learn to connect with people from other faiths, and you're all trying to be good social workers, as it were. You're trying to do the best for your clients. When I taught social work at college, I came across a young woman who said she wanted to be a social worker, but she hated smokers and would never be able to work with them. And so I counselled her out of it. I said, look, if you feel that, you've got to start where the person is. You can't be go in there telling them you live your life like this, that, and the other. That's not what social work is. You go in and you find out what their problems are. If there's a problem that they are experiencing that you can help with, you do that. You can't sort the whole of their lives out, and you're not there to judge them.
There must have been places you've been to as a social worker and seen the depravity, really horrible things that most of us wouldn't ever want to see, let alone be part of it.
No.
So how did you cope, having walked out of a flat, a house, wherever, having seen something that was so disgusting? How did you cope with it?
If I'm honest with you, Martin, most of the cases, there's a certain emotional distance between you and the person.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you compare that to things going wrong in your own family, or being a problem with your children or your parents or wife or husband, conflict, those things get to you inside. Mm-hmm. But most people, where occasionally there are cases that are so awful, often abuse cases, that the screw is turned. And particularly if you're threatened as part of your involvement with people, people are defensive. They will sometimes think you're there to break their family up. You have to work with that. You have to get them to see that you're fulfilling a role, that you're not making a judgment that is not yours to make. Ultimately, it'll be the police or the courts that make those judgments. You're just a conduit. But it's hard to get that. But when you're involved in those situations, when you see children suffer, then it does hurt, yeah.
We could all name certain cases over the past 20, 30 years.
Yes.
Where social workers have been given, I think, a raw deal. And in light of what you're saying, there was a famous case, was it Peter, little Peter?
Yes, baby Pete, yes.
Yeah, and for those that don't know about it, because you listen around the world, if I remember rightly, it was a mother and father who were abusing little baby Peter. And to cover up all the scars and all the horrible things they were doing to him, whenever a social worker called round, oh, look, he's just been eating chocolate cake, and they smeared his face with chocolate cake.
That's right, yes, yeah. Now, the thing about that case was that the mother, before that man moved in, she was perhaps on the borderline of coping properly in terms of looking after her child.
Wow.
And when this very nasty character moved in, which eventually led to the death of that child, it's not always, but often it can be sort of reconstituted relationships or step-parent type things where the risks are higher. And that's when they started concealing from the services what was going on. When I left a local authority that I was working for as a team manager, I wanted to leave because I had 20 cases of children, 20 children on the child protection register and no staff to run those cases. And the problem is that the extreme cases are comparatively speaking, very rare.
Uh-huh.
But there's a whole raft of people who are on the borderlines, where there's neglect, but it's not extreme, where there's kind of the parents have got their own difficulties, maybe mental health, maybe drink. And so you're making judgments about a large number of people who look as if it could get to an extreme point, but only one or two of those people will get to the extreme point. And unless you've got a range of resources to get all of those people into day services to look at their parenting in a more natural way than just doing the odd visit here and there, mistakes are always going to be made.
Obviously, it wasn't you that was involved in this case, but being a social worker and a teacher by this time,
yes,
you obviously had to learn up on it.
Yes.
But had it been you going in there and seeing the chocolate cake, and the reason why I'm saying this is it's something that you, I think, might have been alluding to already. You walk out of there at the time thinking, oh, it's just chocolate cake. And then a few weeks later, it's all over the newspapers.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why didn't the social worker spot that? How would you have coped?
If that had been me, that would have been the end of my career.
Yeah.
Simple as that. I was fortunate that I never came across that. I was in frontline work for nearly 20 years.
Yeah. And that poor person, the social worker that did that, what I'm trying to say also is that if that had been you,
yes,
not knowing just what was going to happen, but you just saw the depravity there and then,
yes,
walking out of there, how do you make sure that you can go back to your ordinary lifestyle, going home to your wife, having a nice meal? How do you divorce it?
Yeah, not very easily, I suppose, is the answer. But actually, it's not just you, it's the whole system. There's a child protection system. There should be conferences, there should be teams, there should be supervision. But most of all, there should be resources. And sadly, day resources, day assessment resources, and even residential assessment resources, which there used to be when I started, have decreased. So it's not possible. There used to be resources, for example, where you could get a family and explain to them that there were concerns about the way they were parenting and persuade them to go into a residential place for 2 or 3 weeks so that they could be not just observed, but guided and helped. Compare that to visiting someone for 3/4 of an hour. You're just not going to get the same picture. That's the difficulty. You know, it could have easily been me who missed that sign. It could have been anyone. Another factor is to what extent you collude with the parents and to what extent you stand firm and say, look, no, I'm not happy with that. I want the child seen by a doctor. So those are times where you have to kind of firm up and be strong.
And still go home and have a nice piece of salmon with your wife in the evening.
Yeah, well, you have to go back. You're not on your own. You shouldn't be on your own. You should always go back and talk to your supervisor. And if they're concerned, they will either send you back or they will convene a meeting or they'll do something that impacts.
Where you're sharing again.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you for giving us a bit of a better understanding on that. From philosophy to being a social worker.
Yes.
And now for the easy life, being an author.
Yes.
If you really want to put a cat amongst the pigeons, let's take out some basic doctrine and throw it into a novel. That's going to upset people. And then let's take something and see what I think it means. That's going to upset even more people. So why did you want, and I don't want you to discuss the book in full because I'd rather people go and buy this book, if that's all right, on MD Publishing.
Yes.
Why did you want to first write a book, set it in history, especially Roman history?
I'd already written 2 other books, which were historical fiction, if you like. One was called The Daughter, around the time of Christ. It's about a young girl, a young Jewish girl who's forced into an arranged marriage and runs away. And the other one was about the Reformation, when the Catholic and Protestant Church became engaged in conflict.
Oh, easy subject, that one.
Yes.
What could possibly go wrong there?
A lot. So it's easier to write when there's a lot going wrong than when it's all tickety-boo.
Oh, good point, yeah.
But for this one, Viviana, what first of all triggered me was I wanted to know what point the church and the state first came together. And it was around the time of the Nicene Creed when Emperor Constantine had become the sole emperor of the Roman Empire that happened. Interestingly enough, in the early 300s, there was a very intense persecution of Christians. And so the story starts there. And when that persecution was over, partly because of Constantine and another emperor called Licinius, they used to share the Roman Empire because it was so big, they used to have more than one emperor, that the church then had to decide how it was going to deal with people who had, as it were, not been loyal to the faith. You know, it's a bit like, it's easy to say, oh, they were disloyal to the faith. But if you know your family are going to be possibly killed or chucked out of their house or harmed in some way, you know, you think twice about what you sign up to. And so the church wanted to know how to deal with people who had been less than kind of defiant in the face of persecution. And that's where penances and humiliations in front of other believers sort of had a bit of a beginning, as it were. Constantine was not like what we understand by Christ's teaching in terms of the battle that goes on really that matters is the one in your own heart, what your motives are, what you really want, how you deal with your appetites and your instincts, as it were. He decided that God would show his approval if the Christian God was the greatest God, and he wasn't totally sure, by giving him victory on the battlefield. So if he lost on the battlefield, he'd done something bad. This is how they all thought about the gods. So persecution stopped under him. But then the bishops started arguing about fundamentally lots of doctrinal things, but fundamentally about whether Christ was a creation of God, a perfect creation. This was what somebody called, a priest called Arius was promoting, or whether Christ himself was part of the Godhead. In the beginning was the Word, etc., etc. And so the bishops could not agree. And what Constantine was upset about was that the public disagreement about this would upset God. And then God would punish Constantine by making him lose on the battlefield. Constantine wasn't somebody who was a believer in humility. He believed in his personal superiority. He called the bishops to Nicaea and said, come up with one line and that will be it. But in fact, it never worked out like that. There were 10 councils before the 381 council, which sort of finally settled the matter. Constantine kept juggling between people who said Christ was a created being and the Orthodox Christians who said he wasn't. And the story is built around that.
Got you. Was that the number one problem Constantine had with Christianity and the theology of it?
He described the theology as a trivial matter that wasn't even worth public debate. He didn't see it as important. What he saw as important was the way the church was in disagreement with each other, the splitness of the church. He thought that would upset God. It was a very superficial understanding of God, even from a human perspective, and certainly not. It was more what it looked like to God rather than what actually is going on inside our hearts, as Christ kept coming back to.
Yeah, but did Constantine understand that bit about it's what goes on in your heart that matters?
I don't think he did. If they were baptized, they were then supposed to live perfect, holy lives, and they were sort of allowed up to one sin. Yes. So Constantine didn't get baptized until he was on his deathbed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, around 337, 338.
Wow.
He may have capitulated at that point. Who knows what went on in his heart? But publicly, he wasn't interested in theological debates. He thought the Christian God might be the greatest God. That's why he stopped persecuting them. But in his temple, in his palace, he had statues of the gods of war, Mars, Jupiter, and the sun. You know, Sol Invictus was called.
If we go back in my time machine and bring him up to here and say, this is what's going on in the church now, how much of a headbutt would he be doing to himself going, oh?
Well, absolutely, yeah. No, he would be doing the same. But the whole idea of Christian faith is not to big yourself up. It's not to bolster up your own self-importance, because if you do that, there's no room for God.
Interesting enough, then, with old Constantine,
Yes,
in your book, you're not just satisfied with talking about the Nicene Creed and all the permutations of how horribly wrong that
yes,
could go. Even though, to Constantine's credit, he does what I love to do as a former training officer myself, to facilitate.
Yes.
He facilitated it to all the bishops. Good move, Constantine.
yes.
But along with that, you thought, well, let's talk about something else. What can we talk about in Christianity that isn't going to ruffle any feathers? I know, slavery.
Right.
So you threw that in as well.
I did.
Why?
Well, one of the characters has a discussion with his father about slavery in the story. And it resonated with me because in the Bible, there are lots of references to slavery. So in the Old Testament, there are rules about the limitations of slavery and the release of Hebrew slaves every 7 years and the Jubilee every 50 years. And in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul talks about we are all free in Christ, Greek or Jew, man or woman, slave or free, etc. And there are other passages as well that echo that. But also the institution of slavery is not confronted. Slaves, obey your masters. Masters, do not mistreat your slaves. So in saying that everyone was free, he was saying that everyone was free to love God and to receive God's grace. He wasn't saying slavery is right or wrong. He was saying it's there. So Wilberforce decided he was an evangelical who fought against slavery, as you know, for 30, 40, 50 years. I can't remember how long it was now. And he focused on the idea that we are all created in God's image. And there was a particular verse he quoted in Acts where it says that God is the father of all nations. And so he put that in the context of the other passages about slavery in the Bible. He said the Jewish dispensation was mild compared to what was going on in the slave trade in the 17th and 18th centuries. And he quoted, "Thou shalt not murder," because so many slaves died from incredibly harsh treatment. So the idea of love your neighbor as yourself was a kind of overarching principle which put the other passages about slavery into some kind of cultural context. So how do you read it is very, very important. Slavery comes into the story because of a conversation between a son and a father.
Because I do hear this from time to time by agnostic stroke atheists saying, how can God exist? Where you look in the Old Testament, it's all about slavery, and then it says this in the New Testament.
Yes.
How would you answer a well-known person on live TV, let's say, who would then throw that at you? How would you answer that?
I would say that, yes, you could use biblical passages to justify slavery. You could use biblical passages to justify the mistreatment of women, for example, or what we see as the mistreatment of women. Yes, you could use it, but you can also use biblical passages to highlight the fact that God is merciful, righteous, and gracious, a kind of moral perfection that we can't reach. And is it that character of God which should emanate through our lives as we try to live our faith out? Or should we simply just say, oh, it's all a load of anachronistic rubbish because of what happened in cultures hundreds and thousands of years ago? I realize it's difficult because there are some principles of Scripture which are kind of everlasting, and there are some which are culturally restricted. For example, it's anathema to us, some of the punishments for sins in the Old Testament, in Leviticus. We simply don't live like that. We can't square them with our consciences. But if you want to pursue a life of hurting other people in order to bolster up your own self-esteem, you could use passages or misuse them like that. But I don't believe that's what the faith is about. And that's why I believe that fundamentally Christ becoming a human being and suffering with us and overcoming death. It's not just a sort of payment for morally wrong things that have been done, but a statement that life is ultimately created for us for good things, for sharing, for compassion. And that's where we should get our fulfillment from, both with each other and in relation to God.
When we talk about slavery then, in this book and through all your research,
yes,
the slavery that we had 2,000 years ago, how comparable would it be to William Wilberforce's slavery that we know so much about these days, and the shackles and the stuff?
Yeah, well, I think he soft-sold it a bit in order to create the comparison between the brutality that was going on in his own time with the transportation of slaves from Africa to the West Indies for the sugar plantations. And that was what was uppermost in his mind. Of course, he wasn't there in the Jewish dispensation, so we don't even know if the Jubilee ever happened. It was certainly written down. But there were some very difficult passages in the Old Testament which don't fully ring true with us. People could sell their daughters, for example. Marriage wasn't necessarily the highest priority when it came to a slave master letting a slave free, but not his wife, if that slave master had actually procured the wife for the slave. So it was complications like that I think Wilberforce wanted to minimize. He very seldom actually referred to biblical passages like that. The passages he referred to were love your neighbor as yourself and you shall not murder. So that's the character of God. Everything else has to fall underneath that. None of us can know what the life as a slave. Roman slaves could live, domestic slaves could live for many, many years, as Cicero's slave did. But if they were in the mines or slaves for the army, then they had very short lives. Or slaves on the rowing, on boats, for example.
On this book itself then, as a philosopher, as a social worker, as a historian, obviously, writing this, what did you personally get out of this book for yourself in your faith?
The main character is someone called Viviana, who's the woman who lives through all of this. And what I got out of it was that through her, she was someone who had a lot of sufferings in her life, but she had a faith. But that faith didn't make her feel joyful all the time. She could express her doubts. She could be honest with God, just as David was in the Psalms. And it was that honesty of her in her character that gave me the most satisfaction.
Why?
I think probably because it mirrors the way I conduct my own faith. God is not mocked. He's not deceived. He can see us. So it's pointless trying to kid him into thinking that we're okay when we're not, that we understand things when we don't, that we're not angry when we are, that we haven't got it right when we're looking at our own appetites and instincts. There's no point in trying to hide from him. Just be yourself. But with other Christians, obviously, you can't, turn up in church and hang your heart out on your sleeve necessarily. So, yeah, there's certain sort of cultural things that make us more insular but with God, I think we can open ourselves out fully.
And what do you want the reader to get? Because obviously they're going to go out in their droves and order the book as soon as they've heard this podcast. Apart from all the royalties that are going to be coming your way, so you can buy yourself a private jet and fly around the world.
Yes. Selling
the sequel, if there is going to be a sequel.
I think with the royalties, Martin, we'll probably have a coffee together.
Yes, but it depends where. That's the thing. In your private jet, you can take us there.
Yeah.
Assuming that doesn't happen, though, what do you want the reader to get out of this book?
I think I want them to get an understanding that human fallibility was involved in the development of the church, and it always has been. Christ didn't write a book. He didn't give us a procedures manual for how to run a church. Yeah, the Apostle Paul did in his time, but even some of those rules are rules that we wouldn't necessarily keep. So he was saying, in his letter to Timothy, only look after widows who are over 60 years old. But we wouldn't have a rule like that because we look after. He must have had a reason for it. And the reason was that he didn't feel the church could actually bear the load of looking after other widows. But he also had a very sort of slightly restricted view of women, that they should either marry or, that they should marry. There wasn't an either about it. He just felt they should.
I think what you've said here is really good. It's about fallibility. And I like that. But also, in Paul's case, and I'm flying the flag for a previous episode with Jeannie Kendall, where we looked at why did Paul champion women in the Bible?
Yes.
And from what I think she was saying was that Paul couldn't change everything.
No.
And like you said about William Wilberforce, and this is what I picked up on from you just saying that, is that he just went for like 1 or 2 points.
Yes.
And I think if Paul went in and say, right, this is what you got to do, there's a tsunami of rules here that I'm not pleased with.
Yes.
They wouldn't cope.
No. I'm not decrying Paul, because I think he was a radical in his own time.
Yeah.
But when we look back at him, he's a bit old-fashioned.
Yeah. But you can see maybe why he was doing that.
Yes, sure. And then someone in 200 years' time will look back at us in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And say, did they ever go for that cup of coffee? But the fallibility is a great point. And just to close on this one then, what else would you like to say about fallibility, please?
I think that in the way that the Bible teaches, and that God loves everyone equally, we're all equally fallible. So whether we have different positions of power and wealth doesn't change that. And I think if we hang on to that, particularly those people who have got important positions, which are very difficult to manage, I'm sure. I'm just an armchair critic. I think that's what God wants from us. He wants us to never believe that we are more important than we are, but always remember that we are worth much more than perhaps we think we are.
What a brilliant closing line. Thank you.
Okay.
Wow. So much to dissect on that. And I'll be looking forward to editing this out in the weeks to come, just so I can learn more what you're saying. But in the meantime, the last question of all that we have to do now, please, kind sir. Nathan Driscoll, who is your Christian hero, please?
I've mentioned him already. It's Desmond Tutu.
Yeah.
He's written a book, believe it or not. It's called God Is Not a Christian. It's about God's love for everyone. And it's not about the fact that he's, ashamed of his faith or doesn't believe that his faith is special to him. But it is about sharing the love of Christ with people, as well as the teaching of Christ. And what he really says, you get in the book, is that if you just share the teaching without the love, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to get into these silos of, I'm this person, I'm identified with that group and that group. You won't cut across the barriers in the way that Christ did. And the thing about him I like so much is that humility isn't about just letting people kick sand in your face. It's about not seeing yourself as too important. So you can be assertive and humble because you can assert the right to your own dignity. But in that process, you're also asserting the right to other people's dignity. And it's that quality that comes out from him and shines. When I read his book, I can hear him talking.
It's a great choice. It really is. I think he ties in very nicely, really, with what you've been sharing throughout this whole podcast. The book, again, is called Viviana.
Yes.
I never did actually ask you where you got the name Viviana from. So very quickly, where did you get that name from?
When I write a story, I look up names of that era and I just have a list of them. And I just liked it. I just liked the name.
Yeah, it's a great name. Viviana is available at all good Christian bookshops and elsewhere. It's on MD Publishing. Nathan Driscoll, thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to all the editing because it's great for me to learn again what you've shared. Thank you so much for spending time today.
Thank you, Martin.
Cheers, God bless. And if you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe button. Really means a lot. Thank you. Next time on Off Grid Christianity.
I think he was getting exasperated with me because I wasn't making my mind up. I kept doing more jobs which could have been useful in surgery or could have been useful in general practice. And at some point, you have to make a decision. So I think he was, getting quite frustrated, and understandably frustrated. When's this young man going to make his mind up and get set on a course? And reading his letters when he was that age, back to his parents, he was in a similar situation. he wasn't sure he was going to do surgery. He thought he would actually rather be a good physician, internal medicine. That's the trouble with life, isn't it? We only get one shot at it. It's like parents, if you knew everything you knew once you're a grandparent, then parenting would be so much easier. But you begin parenting without any formal training.
So please join me with the author of a new book, Through Fire and Water, The Life and Faith of a Naval Surgeon in War and Peace, Dr. Mark Houghton. Until then, cheerio.